As we know, managers are the superheroes of change because they are the Clark Kents of change. They are communicators, liaisons, advocates, resistance managers, and coaches. And when asked what role they struggle with the most, the research tells us that it is the role of the resistance manager. So, in this video, we will take a look at the 10 tried and tested tactics, man that was hard to say, for managing resistance. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on that notification bell if you'd like to see our future videos where we will explore more research on resistance. My name is Nick and we are And Change. Resistance can come in many forms, but nobody lives comfortably in any form of resistance. It's that discomfort that drives people to raise objections to the change or propose different solutions or approaches. But generally, they are always vocal about their resistance. There will always be objections to change, and sometimes we are not able to address each and every one immediately. But what we are able to do is acknowledge them. Make sure the individual feels heard by listening to and understanding those objections. Sometimes just speaking about it can help the person work it out for themselves and help them get to the real reason behind their resistance. Other times, understanding their objections demonstrates empathy and creates a shared experience of the change. Either way, listening and understanding their objections is an effective method of mitigating resistance. Whenever change needs to occur, everyone tends to get stuck on the how. How are we going to do things differently? How are we going to implement this change? And we've found that this can often be a huge source of resistance. If you start the conversation with how, then you're immediately focusing on how things are going to be done differently. When in fact, focusing on the what is changing enables you to illustrate the vision of the change and coax a more positive reaction. Leave the how for later. When introducing a change, rather focus on what is changing. You might find that people will want to work out the how for themselves, and this enables them to feel more involved and engaged in the change. This in fact invites them to take ownership of their own change. Sometimes it's really just as simple as identifying and removing barriers. Now, barriers can take many forms. They can be physical, emotional, or mental. It is important that these barriers are identified through that conversation. And this does sound easier to do in theory than it is to do in practice, but it is important to have that conversation. Talk to the people impacted by the change, and you may discover that there are barriers that you were previously unaware of that prevent them from embracing that change. Once you've identified the barrier, then at least you have something to work with. And you can try to remove that barrier if you can. And if you can't, at least you can engage the right person who can. When it comes down to it, the parameters of the change need to be clear. That means simple, clear choices with simple, clear consequences. Often, if those choices and consequences are well explained and clear up front, then someone is able to make those choices and stick to their chosen path more clearly. If everything is left up to the imagination, then people may test boundaries just to see where the limits are. But keep in mind that all consequences don't necessarily have to be negative. Make sure you outline the consequences of not changing and the consequences of changing. Not all change feels good at first, But one thing must be true, and that the consequences of not changing must outweigh the consequences of changing. Hope is one of the most powerful emotions that we have. It has inspired humanity to greatness and seen it through some of its toughest times. That is to say that not all change is to be viewed as tough times, but what is certainly true of change is that all change feels inherently uncomfortable as you transition from the old to the new. Having hope shining at the end of this dark tunnel can often be the primary motivator for pushing through. That hope that the future state and that this change can be to the benefit of not just one, but all. In the case of a negative change, say retrenchments, give hope for what the future will be like after the change. Some changes are inherently negative, but the point really is to focus on what the future looks like beyond it. The true meaning of taking people along with a change is not simply a matter of telling them that a change is coming and that they need to be on board with it. It's being able to explain the change in such a way that it makes it beneficial to them to choose to change. Make sure that you show them the benefits of the change in a real and tangible way, ideally upfront. Often the future state has its own benefits built into it, and that's why you're changing. And often those benefits are real and tangible, but it is important to show those benefits up front and throughout the entire change process so that people are enabled to motivate themselves to change. Having a leader make a personal appeal to those directly impacted by the change can have a stronger effect than you might think. On a foundation of trust, that leader can get personally involved in the change and ask for the involvement of others by demonstrating how it is important to them. Just this act of making a personal appeal can build a rapport and help employees understand that they play an important role in this change's success and that they are part of something greater. As highly social creatures, it is natural for us to want to be in agreement with our colleagues and friends. And sometimes one or two individuals hold a great deal of influence over the opinions of the entire group. It is for this reason that converting the strongest dissenters can often be an effective tactic. What we actually see most often is that when you convert the strongest dissenters, you actually end up making your mightiest advocates for change. Having opposed the change so vehemently in the past, they then become your best advocates for change because they are most familiar with the reasons why they originally resisted in the first place. A word of caution for these last two tactics. They are both the most powerful and the most dangerous tactics that you could use to mitigate resistance, and should only be used as an absolute last resort. It is all good and well to talk about the consequences of changing or not changing, but it is far more powerful to actually see those consequences demonstrated in action. We need to repeat things 5 to 7 times before they are remembered when spoken, but we only need to see them once. As they say, seeing is believing. Try to keep in mind what we said earlier. Not all consequences need to be negative. There certainly is a great deal of power in demonstrating positive consequences too. Providing incentives can be a powerful and simple tool that managers often turn to help manage resistance in times of change. The challenge, or rather the risk here, is that by connecting the incentives to the change, you are resting the success of your change, and this includes after its implementation, to those incentives. So what happens to your change when those incentives are no longer there? The real trick here is not to incentivize the person to change, but rather to incentivize the person to perform as a result of what is changing. What you incentivize is absolutely crucial. If you would like to stay up to date with the most recent research on managing change and managing resistance, be sure to hit that subscribe button and leave us a like. Let us know which of these 10 tactics did you find most helpful in your change journey. From myself, Nick, and from everyone here at Change, happy changes.